In the history of the Lycan territories, there was only ever one sovereign powerful enough to unite the 12 packs. His name, Lucien, the Lion. He was dominance given form, a true alpha whose mere presence could force even the fiercest betas to their knees. But that immense power? It was his undoing. For the last 6 months, the Citadel has felt less like a seat of power and more like a tomb. King Lucien is confined to his bed. The kingdom believes he is dying. In the hushed royal chambers, the air was heavy with failure. Dr. Alara Reed, calculating and pristine in her white coat, held up a shattered crystal artifact. "The 4th alchemite healer in a month," Alara said to Commander Zev, her voice crisp and low. "They all end the same way." Zev, scarred and intensely loyal, stood at attention. "They try to remove the curse, Doctor. And the feedback destroys their life force." "Precisely," Alara confirmed. "It's not a standard magical affliction. It's a power sink. Something anchoring his dominance." Lucien, pale but looking more frustrated than sick, lay on the vast, dark bed. He subtly clenched his jaw, shooting a silent, enduring command toward Zev. "This is the key. Every healer saw the king's life force draining, and they thought, cure it. They didn't realize that drain was the only thing keeping the world around him safe." "The reports are bad, sire," Zev whispered. "Lord Orion is gathering packs. They believe your weakness is a sign from the moon goddess." Lucien's voice was rough, but firm. "Let him howl, Zev. He will learn. A weak wolf still has teeth." He struggled to sit up, but a wave of pain forced him immediately back down. Alara stepped forward, concern etching her face. "Sire, your internal energy fields are becoming volatile. Even a flicker of your true alpha dominance could—" "Could what, Alara?" Lucien interrupted, his eyes flashing briefly. "Incinerate your perfectly starched collar? Get to the point." "We have exhausted all standard means," Alara conceded. "The anchor is stable but not stagnant. It requires a counterforce, a unique biosignature capable of absorbing the overflow." Zev's gaze dropped. "You mean the only option left? The Thorn family?" Lucien closed his eyes. The pain of the realization was clear. "Find the one who was untouched, and bring her here. Now." Act 2. The Death-Touched Vesper. Thorn lived on the edge of the map, both literally and socially. In a pack hierarchy, Omegas are essential. But Vesper's specific line? They were called Death-Touched. It wasn't because they were weak. It was because their very presence seemed to drain the energy of others. Vesper's system was less a vessel and more a void. She walked through the run-down fringe village, past villagers who actively recoiled and crossed themselves. She was bartering for herbs with an old Omega woman who kept a nervous distance. "The price is high, Vesper," the woman muttered. "For herbs touched by me." "I know," Vesper said, calm but sharp. "But these are the rare lunar sage you need for the fever. Take the silver." The woman snatched the silver and hurried away. As she did, Zev and 2 guards rode into the village, causing the frightened villagers to scatter. Zev's voice was loud and authoritative. "We are looking for an Omega of the Thorn line, Vesper Thorn." Vesper didn't hide. She turned and faced Zev directly, her posture holding a weary resignation. "That would be me, Commander. Has the Citadel finally decided to banish me properly?" Zev, disarmed by her directness, dismounted. "No banishment. The king requires your presence. You are coming with us, now." Vesper let out a dry laugh. "The king? I was rejected by the royal bloodline at birth. Why would the lion summon a mouse?" "Because, Thorn, the lion is not asking for a cure," Zev said, getting closer. "He is asking for a miracle, and Alara Reed believes you are the only one who might pull it off." Vesper looked at Zev. A spark of curiosity cut through her caution. This wasn't an offer. This was a summons. Act 3. The anchor Vesper was brought to a sterile, secret chamber in the Citadel, full of humming technical equipment. Dr. Ilara Reed was waiting. "You don't look like much," Ilara said, coldly appraising Vesper. "The reports claim your cellular energy absorption rate is impossible." "My rejection meant freedom from the Pack's demands," Vesper replied. "It also meant a lifetime of solitude. I learned to use my impossible nature to survive." "Good. Survival is what you'll need." Ilara gestured to a complex metal apparatus. "We are going to test your claim." Ilara placed a small, crackling crystal, a tiny ball of lightning, into the apparatus. "This is a highly condensed packet of unstable alpha dominance energy, pure raw power. Any normal omega would dissolve touching it." "And you want me to—" "What?" Vesper asked, her eyes fixed on the crystal. "Place your hand on the conduit," Ilara commanded. "I will release a controlled pulse. We need to know if your system can absorb and hold it, or if you will simply explode." Vesper had nothing to lose. She took a deep breath and placed her hand on the cold metal conduit. "Releasing the pulse in 3, 2. Ilara's voice was tight. A high-pitched electric whine filled the air. The crystal flared brightly, sending the light and energy through the conduit and into Vesper's hand. Vesper's eyes widened from the initial shock, but then a slow, controlled golden light began to emanate from her skin. The energy was not burning. It was settling. Ilara stared, shock momentarily breaking her composure. "Impossible. The energy signature is completely neutralized. You are a void." Vesper pulled her hand back, her voice firm. "So, the mouse can hold the fire. Now, tell me the truth about the king's curse." The revelation. Back in the royal chambers, the truth was not what anyone outside this room expected. It wasn't about a cure. It was about containment. "We've been lying to the kingdom," Ilara admitted. "King Lucien is not suffering from a curse placed by an enemy. He is suffering from a self-imposed solution." Zev elaborated. "When he was 18, his dominance surged. It wasn't just authority. It was a physical force. It nearly killed his mother. He couldn't risk a mate, couldn't risk children." Lucien opened his eyes and met Vesper's gaze. "I commissioned the ritual myself. The dominance anchor. It would constantly draw my excess power, rendering me human enough to rule without accidentally shattering my own court. So the illness, the fever," Vesper realized, connecting the pieces. "That's the anchor struggling to contain a power that is now too great for it alone. You're not dying, King. You are overloading." "The anchor needs a stable sink," Ilara confirmed. "Something to absorb the overspill permanently. Vesper, you are the sink. You are the only living creature that doesn't dissolve when exposed to his raw power." "The treatment isn't a magical potion," Zev explained to Vesper. "It's a psychic and physical bond, a permanent merger with the anchor itself. It means you will be his mate." Mate. The very thing she had been rejected from her whole life. But this wasn't about love or desire. This was about function. She was the only one who fit the king's design. "This is not romance, Omega," Lucien warned, looking her dead in the eye. "This is a sacrifice. You will carry my power, my weakness, my burden. Your life will be tied to mine. Do you accept this task?" Vesper stood taller, a fierce resolve tightening her posture. "I have lived a life of rejection for a power I didn't ask for. If this impossible power can be used for something other than fear, then I accept." The bond begins. Lucien was moved to a ceremonial platform. Ilara monitored the instruments while Zev stood guard. "Commander Zev, keep the shields at max. The first pulse will be destabilizing. Vesper, are you ready?" Ilara instructed. "Ready," Vesper affirmed, her hand hovering over Lucien's chest. May the moon goddess protect us, Zev muttered. Vesper placed her hand on the king's chest. A searing, electric blue light flashed across both their bodies, then slowly began to merge into the soft golden hue Vesper emitted earlier. The energy connected them. It didn't heal. It exchanged. A silent, violent transfer of power. Vesper became the living tether holding the lion's rage at bay. But as the bond formed, Vesper saw more than energy. Through the merger, a flash of pure, uncontrolled memory appeared in her mind. Lucien commissioning the anchor ritual on himself. King Lucien put the curse on himself. He didn't want the anchor removed. He wanted it reinforced. King Lucien put the curse on himself. He didn't need a cure. He needed a queen capable of surviving him. And the kingdom is about to meet her. The Sovereign's Anchor. Chapter 2. The Truth of the Bond. The Integration. The golden light faded. Vesper snatched her hand back from King Lucien's chest, as if scalded, staggering a step away. The sheer volume of raw, contained power she had just buffered left her body vibrating. A low hum beneath her skin. She wasn't tired. She was charged. Lucien, however, looked worse. Sweat beaded on his brow and his breathing was shallow. He was stabilized, but the initial bonding pulse had taken a steep toll. "Report, Doctor," Zev commanded, his hand resting near his sidearm, watching Vesper with intense suspicion. Dr. Ilara Reed consulted her instruments, her composure already back in place. "The initial integration is successful. The anchor's feedback loop has dropped by 30%. His life force is no longer crashing." She glanced at Vesper, a flicker of professional awe in her eyes. She stabilized a catastrophic power overload in under 10 seconds. Unprecedented. Vesper ignored the doctor. Her focus was entirely on the king. "You're not overloading," she corrected, her voice quiet but firm. "You're fighting. The anchor is designed to pull power, but it was fighting you because you were fighting the process." Lucien opened his eyes, now clear and sharp. The sickness momentarily lifted. He didn't deny it. "I commissioned the anchor to protect the kingdom, not to render me a docile lapdog. I must retain enough strength to face threats, like the one currently circling." "Lord Orion," Zev growled. Vesper shook her head. "No, not Lord Orion. The threat of a mate." Zev visibly stiffened. Ilara's lips thinned. "Don't deny it," Vesper challenged, stepping closer to the king's bedside. "In the moment of the bond, I saw your intention. You placed the anchor not just to regulate your dominance, but to act as a filter. You didn't want a mate who was strong in the conventional sense. You wanted one who could physically withstand your uncontrollable self." She pointed at her own chest. "Every other mate would have been destroyed by the dominance overflow. Every healer was destroyed trying to remove the anchor. You created a test only a death-touched void like me could survive." Lucien watched her, a slow, predatory smile finally spreading across his face. "Brilliant, Omega. You absorb the truth as efficiently as you absorb power." "The truth is," Vesper countered, "you were never trying to cure yourself. You were hunting for your permanent counterforce. You placed the curse on yourself because you needed a queen who could anchor the beast you couldn't tame." Training the anchor. The dynamic in the citadel shifted immediately. Vesper was no longer a desperate solution. She was now the king's necessary half. Ilara and Zev treated her with a tense respect, but she felt the invisible weight of the entire pack's future resting on her. The next 24 hours were dedicated to intensive training. In the hidden chamber, Ilara strapped Vesper into monitoring devices. "The bond must be reinforced," Ilara explained. "You need to consciously learn to receive the energy. Think of the dominance anchor as a volatile engine. You are its new radiator." "A radiator that could explode," Vesper muttered. "Precisely, but one that won't if you control the flow." Elara pointed to a dial that measured Vesper's internal energy field. We will start with a small, sustained pulse from the anchor. You must absorb it without flinching, without breaking the connection. The king, now mobile enough to sit in a reinforced chair, watched. His presence, even dampened, was suffocatingly intense. Elara initiated the pulse. A dull ache spread across Vesper's skin, quickly followed by a rush of heat and a dizzying sense of mental pressure. It felt like trying to hold the ocean in a teacup. Short sentences. Stay conversational. Too much, Elara warned. You are constricting the flow. Relax your internal shield. Relax? Vesper scoffed, sweat dripping from her temples. This feels like being swallowed by a star. The star is yours, Omega. Lucien's low voice cut through the noise. Take it. She focused on the feeling of being a void, of having nothing of her own to lose. She consciously let her energy shield drop. The pain vanished, replaced by a raw, cold absorption. The pressure equalized. The golden light flared briefly, then subsided, contained. Elara gasped. She did it. Full absorption. Lucien nodded, a flicker of possessive pride in his eyes. Now, we amplify. If you are to stand by my side, you must be capable of channeling what you contain. Orion's Gambit. The king's sudden partial recovery did not go unnoticed. Lord Orion, an alpha from a powerful neighboring pack, took it as a personal insult. A formal messenger arrived at the citadel gates, demanding an audience. Zev stood beside Lucien's throne, which the king now occupied, pale but commanding. Vesper stood at the king's right, a silent, unsettling presence. The messenger, puffed up with Orion's borrowed arrogance, knelt grudgingly. King Lucien, Lord Orion sends his condolences on your lingering illness. The messenger spat out the words lingering illness with disdain. He is, however, disturbed by the strange energies emanating from the citadel, the energy of witchcraft. Witchcraft, messenger. Lucien's voice was like grinding stone. Yes, sire. The sudden stability after months of decline, and the presence of a notorious death-touched Omega at your side? Lord Orion demands proof that your renewed strength is not unnatural, nor a threat to the purity of the lichen line. Vesper took a slow step forward. The faint golden energy she held made her appear to shimmer. Lord Orion, Vesper spoke, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the heavy alpha atmosphere. The strength of the king is bound to the strength of the territory. If he believes it is unnatural, let him test it. The messenger blinked, startled to be addressed by a mere Omega. You dare speak! Lucien raised a hand, silencing his own guard. Vesper speaks the truth. What does your lord propose as a test? The messenger's face split into a cruel grin. A duel, sire. Alpha to alpha. The old way. If your strength is true, you will defeat him. If it is witchcraft. He looked Vesper up and down. Then the witch and the weak king must be cast out. Lucien leaned forward on his throne. Tell Orion I accept, but not alpha to alpha. He gestured toward Vesper. Tell him the duel will be fought by my sovereign's anchor. He will face her. The messenger's jaw dropped. The great Alpha King was offering up a rejected Omega to fight an established lord. It was either magnificent arrogance or utter madness. The rejected Omega will face Lord Orion, the messenger stammered. No, Vesper corrected, her eyes locking on the messenger's. Tell him the sovereign's anchor will face him. And tell him to bring a strong will. He will need it. The message was delivered. The challenge was accepted. The duel was set. The Sovereign's Anchor. Chapter 3. The Trial of Dominance. The bet. The challenge was unprecedented. An established Alpha Lord facing a rejected Omega, the death-touched, in a duel to determine the legitimacy of the king. You've given Orion exactly what he wanted, Zev hissed, pacing the training chamber later that night. He wanted to expose you as weak, sire. Now he will simply crush Vesper, proving that witchcraft is keeping you alive. Lucien was undergoing his final stabilization process, absorbing a steady current of energy from the anchor. Vesper stood nearby, watching the flow. "No, Commander," Lucien corrected, his voice smoother now, the exhaustion receding. "Orion wanted to face me and prove he was stronger. He will face the force I contain and prove he is obsolete." "But King," Ilara interjected, nervously wiping a smudge from her glasses. "She can absorb the power. We haven't fully tested if she can redirect the sheer dominance you generate. It could shatter her system." Vesper finally spoke, addressing Lucien directly. "It won't shatter me. It will only shatter if I hesitate. I saw your self-imposed ritual, the one that created the anchor. It wasn't about control, it was about transfer." Lucien met her gaze, a deep understanding passing between them. "The anchor doesn't just pull the power away from me, Omega, it deposits it into the most stable vessel available. That vessel is you. And if I absorb all your restrained dominance before the duel—" "Lord Orion won't be fighting an Omega," Vesper concluded, a subtle, dangerous smile curving her lips. "He'll be fighting the full, unleashed power of the lion." Zev stopped pacing, utterly stunned. "You plan to weaponize the curse?" "I plan to prove I was the only queen capable of handling him," Vesper stated simply. The channeling. The next few hours were a terrifying exercise in power management. In the hidden chamber, Lucien lay on the platform, his mental shields lowered completely. Vesper knelt beside him, hands pressed to the anchor's central nexus, the point of their psychic and physical bond. "This is not a slow burn, Vesper," Lucien warned, his breath catching. "I will uncap the anchor's reservoir. You must take it all. Feel the wave. Don't fight it." "If I take it all," Vesper said, her voice shaking slightly, "you will be vulnerable, completely drained." "That is the point of a true mate, Omega," Lucien replied, his eyes dark with intensity. "We trust them to carry our burdens. Now take my strength." Short sentences. High tension. Lucien released the dominance. The air in the room became thick, vibrating like a plucked wire. Vesper felt a torrent, not a pulse. It was pure, uncaged alpha energy. It tasted like raw lightning and scorched earth. It felt like the collective will of 1,000 wolves focused into a single, overwhelming point. Her mind screamed. Her body glowed an aggressive, pulsing gold. She wasn't just absorbing it. She was becoming the battery. Ilara watched the instruments, her hands shaking. "The meters are off the charts. She's holding a king's dominance. It's unstable." Zev looked at Vesper, his loyalty overriding his fear. "She's holding, Doctor. It's draining the king, but she is holding." Vesper gasped, but her eyes held a new, frightening intensity. The gold light around her solidified. The feeling of being a void was gone. She was now full. She held the lion in her core. Lucien collapsed back, pale and utterly spent. He was healthy, but temporarily powerless. Vesper stood, the golden energy now contained, thrumming quietly beneath her skin. She looked at the king, then at the time. "It is time for the duel," she announced. Her voice was the same, but the power behind it was utterly new. The duel, the true alpha. The duel arena was packed. Lord Orion, a massive, arrogant alpha, stood opposite Vesper. He wore the smug certainty of a winner facing a sacrificial lamb. The atmosphere was electric with the anticipation of bloodshed. "Look at the king, hiding behind his witch," someone in Orion's section roared. Lucien, barely able to walk, was seated in the royal box, flanked by a nervous Zev and Ilara. He looked frail, utterly unprotected. Orion laughed, a booming, condescending sound. "King Lucien, you insult your pack. You send a rejected Omega to face a true alpha? Perhaps this one touch from my power will snap your little toy and break your anchor for good." Vesper stepped onto the dirt, the silent concentration of a predator in her stance. "Lord Orion," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally across the arena. "I am not here to fight with my pack's power. I am here to fight with my king's." The challenge was met with gasps. Orion simply charged, his intention clear: end the duel in a flash of raw, physical alpha dominance. He expected Vesper to crumble, to submit, to dissolve, the moment of the third twist. As Orion closed the distance, his physical power surging, Vesper did not raise a weapon. She did not dodge. She simply opened the gate. Vesper unleashed the absorbed dominance. It wasn't a claw, or a blast, or a punch. It was a silent, invisible wave of sheer, uncaged alpha authority. The force Lucien had feared, the power the anchor had restrained for years, was channeled directly through the Omega. Orion hit it like a truck hitting an unseen wall. His charge stopped instantly. His face contorted, not in pain, but in visceral, instinctual submission. His knees buckled with a soundless crack. The raw, terrifying supremacy of the lion's power, amplified by Vesper's perfect channeling, broke his will instantly. He dropped to his hands and knees, whimpering, his body involuntarily pressed to the dirt. He was not physically injured, but his inner alpha was utterly crushed. Vesper stood over him, the golden light radiating outwards. The force continued, spreading out across the arena, a visible ripple of psychic power. Every wolf in Orion's faction, betas, omegas, even the alphas, dropped to the ground, trembling and bowing their heads. The entire pack was forced into submission without a single drop of blood being spilled. The king's true power, channeled through his mate, had asserted its absolute, terrifying supremacy. Vesper slowly reabsorbed the residual energy, the golden light fading back beneath her skin. She looked up at the royal box. Lucien, watching the scene, gave her the faintest, proud nod. Vesper looked down at the whimpering Orion. "Lord Orion," she said, her voice now calm, yet carrying the weight of command. "Your challenge is dismissed. The sovereign's anchor is stable." The duel was over. The queen had arrived. The sovereign's anchor. Chapter 4. The Cost of the Crown. The Aftermath. The roar from the crowd was a wave of chaotic sound, not entirely of loyalty, but of sheer terror mixed with undeniable awe. No one in living memory had witnessed such raw, unmitigated alpha dominance. That it was delivered by a previously rejected Omega was what shattered the paradigm. In the royal box, Zev was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. By the moon goddess, she didn't just win, she subjugated them. Ilara, adjusting her glasses, simply stared at the figures cowering in the arena. "It's not witchcraft, it's engineering." She perfectly channeled the full, uncapped force of his genetic power. Lucien, now fully recovered but mentally drained, watched Vesper walk toward him. He looked at her not as a patient, but as an equal. Vesper knelt before the throne, but it wasn't a bow of subservience. It was a gesture of shared exhaustion. "The anchor is stable, sire," Vesper reported, the golden light finally extinguishing completely beneath her skin. "But the system is demanding a high tariff for that much output." "The price of using my power," Lucien murmured, standing up slowly. He extended his hand, and Vesper took it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. He turned to the silent arena. "Lord Orion has submitted. His challenge is rejected." His voice, though not carrying the same psychic force as Vesper's channel, was still the unbreakable voice of the king. "Let it be known. The sovereign's power is absolute. The sovereign's anchor is his strength, and she is my queen." The pronouncement was met with a stunned, respectful silence, followed by a thunderous, irreversible cheer. The inner conflict. Later, in the privacy of the king's chambers, the tension was palpable, but it wasn't fear. It was physics. Vesper stood near the window, feeling an intense, cold ache in her bones. The power she'd channeled was now settling, and the unique void of her Omega line was oversatiated. Lucien approached her, his own energy now calm. "You look unwell. The high tariff, as you put it?" "I am overflowing," Vesper admitted, rubbing her temples. "My system is meant to absorb instability, but it's not meant to hold stable, raw power for that long. I feel congested. If I absorb too much more, my system will treat it as a foreign body." "Then you are no longer a void, Omega," Lucien observed, his eyes gleaming with intellectual curiosity. "You are a battery that needs discharging." Vesper looked at him sharply. "And how does one discharge a king's dominance?" "You already know," Lucien said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "We are mated by function, Vesper, but the bond is a natural one. It demands equalization. This is where we address the elephant in the room, the relationship as a necessity." "You mean—" Vesper trailed off, uncomfortable, yet acknowledging the undeniable pull of the bond. "The bond acts as a siphon, Vesper. It pulls energy from me and stores it in you. But the only natural way for a mate to equalize that power, to cycle it back into a stable state, is through the traditional consumption of a bond." Lucien stepped closer, his alpha control perfectly modulated to her current state. "You must draw the bond deeper, or the power you hold will make you violently ill." Vesper met his gaze, the shock replaced by reluctant acceptance. "You orchestrated a magical health crisis just to find an Omega who could handle your passion. You are a terrible man, Lucien." Lucien's smile was small, genuine, and utterly alpha. "Perhaps, but I am an honest one, Vesper, and now I am yours." The new threat, the Human Council. The next morning, the Citadel buzzed with a newfound, if cautious, respect. But not all enemies wear fur. Zev burst into the royal study, looking more stressed than he had during the duel. "Sire, the border report. It's not Orion we need to worry about now." "Who is it?" Lucien asked, looking up from maps of the territory. "The Human Council of the Southern Territories." Zev spat out the words. "They saw the display. They know the king is no longer sick. But they didn't see a stabilized ruler. They saw an unleashed weapon." Vesper stepped forward. "They saw a king with an Omega capable of channeling the dominance he promised to keep contained." "Precisely," Zev confirmed. "Their ambassador, Lord Cassian, has arrived unannounced. He sees the power in your mate, King, and he sees it as the potential to shatter the centuries-old non-aggression pact." "So, Orion wanted to test the king's strength. Cassian wants to test the queen's threat," Lucien summarized, a slow burn of frustration building. "Bring him in, and Vesper, stand ready." The ambassador, Lord Cassian, a meticulously dressed human diplomat radiating polished disdain, entered the royal study. He ignored Lucien and fixed his gaze entirely on Vesper. "King Lucien, I offer the council's congratulations on your recovery," Cassian drawled, the skepticism heavy in his tone. "Though we find it curious that your health returned only after your pact discovered a novel way to weaponize a marginalized Omega." "Vesper Thorn is not a weapon, Ambassador," Lucien stated flatly. "She is the sovereign's consort." "Consort?" Cassian laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "We saw her on the field, King. She broke an Alpha Lord with a force that defied the laws of nature. The Human Council views this anchor of yours as a breach of treaty, an escalation." Vesper stepped forward, placing her hand on the king's shoulder, a gesture of ownership and power. "The laws of nature, Ambassador, are not your jurisdiction," Vesper said, her voice steady and unnerving. "My power is the king's power. My stability is the king's stability. If you view stability as a threat, then the problem lies with your own territories." Cassian's eyes narrowed, but the subtle power radiating from Vesper, the latent dominance she carried, forced him to acknowledge her. He felt the cold pressure, even without the channel. "We demand assurances, consort," Cassian pressed. "A demonstration. Prove that this unique bond does not mean a return to the Great Wars." Lucien leaned forward. "And how do you propose we satisfy your paranoia, Ambassador?" "The treaty requires the king to maintain his court without using overwhelming, uncontained force on rival packs," Cassian replied, an ugly glint in his eye. "We demand a public binding demonstration that this anchor does not equal aggression. Until then, the Human Council is mobilizing defenses along every Lycan border." Lucien glanced at Vesper. The pack threat was contained. The human threat was now escalating. The cost of her crown was already rising. "Tell the Human Council," Vesper concluded, a subtle challenge in her tone. "The Sovereign's anchor is prepared to demonstrate exactly what she is capable of." Chapter 5. The Diplomatic Coil. The Burden of Power. The confrontation with Ambassador Cassian had changed the stakes. The problem was no longer Lucien's weakness. It was Vesper's overwhelming strength. In the royal study, Vesper struggled to focus. She felt the heavy, thrumming presence of the latent alpha dominance she carried, and the constant, nagging pull of the bond to Lucien. "The power feels like a physical suit of armor," Vesper explained to Lucien, rubbing her temples. "It protects me, but it also isolates me. The lower-ranking guards won't even make eye contact." Lucien, now fully back to his commanding presence, stood over a map. "They shouldn't. You are carrying the weight of the crown, Vesper. The pack needs to feel that authority, or they will descend into chaos the moment I leave the room." "But I need to discharge it," Vesper insisted. "Ilara says if I continue to hold this much static energy, my own cellular regeneration will slow. It's too much. The void is saturated." "And you already know the solution," Lucien stated, turning to her, his gaze intense. "The bond demands equilibrium. You must draw the bond deeper, or you will burn out." The scene confirms the necessity of their functional but intimate connection. Vesper sighed, the reluctance in her eyes battling with the scientific necessity. "This is a terrible foundation for a marriage, Lucien." "It's a perfect foundation for a kingdom, Vesper," he corrected. "Our mating is an act of governance, not romance. The stability of the land rests on our equilibrium." The terms of engagement. Ambassador Cassian was granted a final audience to establish the terms for the demonstration. He arrived with an air of smug superiority, flanked by 2 human guards armed with silver-tipped crossbows. "The Human Council's terms are simple," Cassian announced, refusing the offer of tea. "Your mate, the Sovereign's anchor, must prove that her ability to channel alpha dominance can be used for control, not destruction." "And your demand?" Lucien asked, his tone dangerously even. "A simple test of will in a neutral enclosed space," Cassian stated, looking directly at Vesper. "We have brought a delegation of our finest human guards, men known for their iron will and absolute loyalty. Your anchor must make them comply with a specific non-violent command, without touching them, without speaking, and without drawing blood." He smiled, a calculated sneer. "If she can prove that her power can subdue human willpower without physical force, the Council will step down from the border. If she fails or resorts to violence, the treaty is broken." Vesper accepted the terms immediately. "Done. Bring your men." The diplomatic coil. The setting was the Citadel's Grand Council Hall. The human guards, 10 of them, grim, heavily armed, and wearing thick leather armor, stood at attention. Ambassador Cassian stood opposite them, looking smug. Vesper and Lucien stood side by side. Vesper knew she couldn't channel the raw, crushing dominance she used against Orion. That would confirm the Council's fears of uncontained force. She needed subtlety. She needed to use the power not as a weapon, but as a suggestion. "Ready, Omega?" Lucien murmured beside her. Vesper nodded. She closed her eyes, seeking the energy she'd absorbed from the anchor. Instead of opening the gate fully, she focused the power, condensing the immense energy into a tight, psychic needle. Creative use of power, suggestion, not force. She didn't aim for their aggression, she aimed for their instinct. Vesper opened her eyes. They held that dangerous, shimmering golden light. She focused her power on the human guards, pushing the psychic needle of dominance into their consciousness. The command, silent psychic force, you are safe. Rest, you are no longer needed. The effect was instantaneous and deeply unsettling. The burly human guards didn't writhe in pain or collapse in submission. Instead, their muscles visibly relaxed. Their faces went slack. They didn't fall to their knees. They simply found the nearest comfortable surface and sat down. One guard leaned against the wall and slowly slid to the floor, resting his head against the cold stone. Another casually crossed his legs and leaned back. The tension vanished, replaced by an unnerving sense of profound calm. They had complied with the nonviolent command. Rest and stand down. They hadn't been defeated, they had been pacified. Ambassador Cassian stared, his jaw hanging open. What? What did you do? They haven't moved, but they're not injured. I demonstrated control, Ambassador, Vesper said coolly. I used the dominance anchor not as a hammer, but as a coil. I convinced their most primal, survival-driven minds that the threat was gone, and their only rational action was repose. The guards sat there, unresponsive, utterly tranquil. The new order Cassian, utterly humiliated, straightened his coat. He couldn't claim violence, yet the king and his Omega had exerted a staggering, silent control. The terms have been met, Cassian conceded, his voice tight with rage. I will inform the human council, but understand this, Queen Vesper, your power is now acknowledged, and every action you take will be scrutinized. Good, Vesper retorted, the subtle golden light fading from her eyes. Because the king and I have a statement for the human council. Lucien stepped forward, reclaiming the center of power. Tell your council this. The Lycan territories will no longer tolerate the rejection of its own. The death-touched Omega is now the sovereign's anchor, and her unique power is the foundation of our new stability. He looked directly at Vesper, making their bond a public political statement. My king's dominance will be used to protect our lands, and only my queen, the anchor, holds the key to its use. Any threat against her is a direct attack on the stability of the crown. Vesper had won the diplomatic battle by redefining her power. She wasn't just a physical shield, she was the regulator of Lycan foreign policy. As Cassian was ushered out, Zev finally allowed himself a small, relieved smile. The pack is stable, the political threat is neutralized, and you've forced the humans into a corner, Your Grace. Vesper, however, slumped slightly. The cost was immediate. I need to discharge the excess energy, Lucien, she whispered, the cold ache returning with force. Now, before I collapse. Lucien didn't hesitate. He took her arm, his expression a mixture of kingly necessity and sudden, sharp desire. Then let us fulfill our duties to the kingdom, my queen. Chapter 6. The Equilibrium's Edge. The Sovereign's Anchor. Chapter 6. The Equilibrium's Edge. The Function of Mating. The royal chambers were not luxurious. They were strategic. Heavy stones absorbed residual power, and the atmosphere was always kept cool, a necessity for an Omega carrying the heat of a king's full dominance. The initial equalization was intense, functional, and devoid of the hesitant discovery of a typical mate bond. For Vesper, it wasn't desire. It was a desperate physical imperative to open the floodgates. For Lucien, it was the first time in years he could release the primal force of his true self without fear of annihilation. The scene opens on the consequence of their earlier interaction, focusing on the physics of their bond. Vesper lay in the large bed, the cold ache finally gone, replaced by a profound, if temporary, sense of peace. The gold light was completely extinguished. "The saturation is gone," Vesper whispered, exhaustion finally hitting her. "My cellular structure is stable." "You are perfectly balanced." Lucien was alert, fully healed, and terrifyingly calm. He looked at her with a chilling mixture of appreciation and necessity. "It works," Lucien stated, his voice flat. "The bond is complete. The anchor has a permanent stabilizing agent." "It's not a loving union, Lucien," Vesper murmured, raising herself up on an elbow. "It's a mandatory exchange of energy, a governing necessity." "Love is a luxury, Vesper," Lucien replied, entirely serious. "Survival is a requirement. You saved the kingdom by submitting to its physics." He reached out and touched the place on her sternum where their bond had physically completed. "You are more valuable to this throne than any emotion." Vesper looked at him, recognizing the cold honesty. "Then ensure the kingdom understands the value of its anchor. I will not be your shield and your secret." The lingering cost. As Vesper and Lucien began to navigate their new reality, attending council meetings, overseeing the punishment of the submitted Lord Orion, a disturbing trend emerged. Vesper was constantly, inexplicably cold. In the Citadel's central courtyard, Vesper was reviewing guard rotations with Zev. Though the day was mild, she wore a heavy fur-lined cloak, shivering. "The cold is pervasive, Zev," Vesper confessed, pulling the cloak tighter. "Since the final equalization, I feel like every ounce of my natural life energy is being used just to hold the anchor's connection." Zev, ever vigilant, noticed the pallor under her skin. "Is this a side effect of the dominance, Your Grace? Ilara did warn that carrying the king's power would be a high tariff." "No," Vesper said, shaking her head. "This feels different. The dominance is stable. This is a drain on me. The anchor siphons the king's excess power, but it's beginning to draw from my natural life force as well." Suspense twist. The solution is now the new, slow problem. Just then, a newly promoted beta guard approached, beaming with nervous pride. "My queen, Commander, the Southern Patrol is ready for dispatch." Vesper looked at the young beta and, for a fleeting moment, she felt the coldness within her lurch. The beta's confident energy seemed to dim, like a weak flame near an open window. Vesper stumbled back slightly, grabbing Zev's arm. "Dispatch them, Commander. Immediately." Zev was instantly alert. "Are you unwell?" "No," Vesper lied, forcing a smile. "Just a chill. Too much time in the damp chamber." The doctors fear Vesper immediately sought out Dr. Ilara Reed, demanding absolute secrecy. In the hidden lab, Vesper explained the feeling, the coldness, the slight lurch when near others, the drain. Ilara's scientific composure finally broke. Her face went slack with shock. "It's worse than we thought, Vesper," Ilara whispered, pulling up complex energy scans of Vesper's cellular structure. "When your void stabilized the anchor, it didn't just become a battery. It became a primary energy conduit for King Lucien." "A conduit is fine," Vesper insisted. "It transfers power." "A conduit takes energy from the source," Ilara countered, pointing at a line graph that showed Vesper's natural energy dipping consistently. "And the king is the source, but the anchor is designed to pull excess from him. He is currently stable. The anchor is now pulling energy from the next strongest available source to maintain the balance, your own life force." Vesper felt a wave of icy realization. "So the anchor is slowly killing me now that the king is cured?" "Not directly," Ilara corrected, fear in her voice. "But you are losing power faster than you can regenerate it naturally. And here is the worst of it. Every wolf you encounter, every powerful life force you draw near, will instinctively be pulled into your void to try and fill you. You are now a walking gravitational sink for life energy." "The death-touched label was right all along," Vesper said, her voice hollow. "You have become the kingdom's life support, Vesper. Elara concluded, staring at her with profound sympathy. You are the greatest force of stability, but your existence demands a constant, subtle sacrifice. The hidden price Vesper returned to the royal chambers. She found Lucien studying a scroll, the picture of serene, recovered health. She didn't need to speak. He looked up, sensed the shift in the air, and closed the scroll. The anchor is stable, Lucien said, a question in his statement. It is, Vesper confirmed, but its balance is demanding a secondary source. It is drawing from my own life force to maintain equilibrium. Lucien's face hardened. He was a king who could handle war, politics, and magical curses, but this was a problem of physics he hadn't planned for. Elara did not foresee this, Lucien stated, his tone betraying a flicker of guilt. No, she didn't, Vesper replied, stepping away from him. You commissioned the anchor to stop your power from killing your mate. You succeeded. But you created an anchor that can only be maintained by the slow, subtle drain of your mate's life. Vesper walked to the window, looking out over the citadel she had saved and stabilized. My new duty, Lucien, is not just to channel your power to fight threats, Vesper whispered, looking at her pale reflection. It is to die slowly, so that you may live perfectly. The king, the mighty lion, stood silent, utterly powerless against the cold, slow physics of the perfect weapon he had created. The Sovereign's Anchor. Chapter 7. Defying the Physics. The King's Fear. The revelation that the anchor was slowly consuming Vesper's life created a new kind of tension in the citadel, a cold, calculated urgency. Lucien wasn't afraid of dying. He was terrified of instability. Vesper's demise meant the catastrophic return of his uncontained dominance. Lucien found Vesper bundled in furs in the royal study, consulting ancient Lycanian texts with Dr. Elara Reed. Find the counter-theory, Lucien commanded, pacing. If the anchor is drawing from her life force to maintain my stability, there must be a way to introduce a supplementary energy source. Theoretically, yes, sire, Elara replied, pointing to a complex formula. The anchor needs a constant low-level flow. We need to introduce an inert, sustainable energy source that the anchor recognizes as less valuable than Vesper's own life force, but more available than the king's excess. An energy decoy, Vesper realized, her eyes, though tired, lighting up with a spark of scientific interest. Something that the void will instinctively pull from, leaving my natural energies alone. But what? Elara wrung her hands. We need something rare, stable, and capable of holding magical saturation without dissolving. Not an omega, not an alpha. Something neutral. Lucien stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on Vesper's neck. He wasn't looking at her skin, but at the place beneath it where the bond pulsed. The source must be related to the anchor's origin, Lucien stated, his voice low and firm. The ritual that created the anchor was performed during the blood-moon conjunction, the night the veil between realms is thinnest. The blood-moon solution. Vesper immediately connected the dots. The anchor doesn't want just energy, it wants stabilized moon magic, the same magic that created the curse. My cellular structure mimics that stability, which is why it's draining me. Then we don't need a decoy, Lucien concluded, his mind already racing ahead. We need a permanent reservoir of blood moon energy, something that can be bonded to Vesper, making her entire system appear to the anchor as the primary infinite source. Elara's eyes widened. That would require an artifact, an extremely rare, powerful object saturated in blood moon magic. Anything less would be consumed by the anchor in minutes. I know the artifact, Vesper said quietly. She stood up, the movement slow. The amulet of the first Luna. It's said to have been forged by the first sovereign to survive the conjunction. It held enough raw moon magic to power the Citadel's wards for a century. It was lost centuries ago, Zev exclaimed, having stood silent guard at the door. Not lost, Vesper corrected. a wry smile touching her lips. It was declared too volatile to remain in the citadel after the First War. It was entrusted to the care of the only line capable of resisting its drain, the rejected Thorn Omegas. The payoff for the rejected status, they were the guardians of the cure. The guardians of the Vale Vesper, accompanied only by Zev, journeyed back to the desolate fringe village. This time she wasn't being dragged as a pariah. She returned as the queen. She sought out her oldest living relative, Aunt Sarah, a frail, ancient Omega who still lived in the isolated Thorn compound. Aunt Sarah, recognizing the dangerous gold light beneath Vesper's eyes, welcomed her without fear. "The void is full, little one. The anchor has found its perfect host, but the fee is too high." "The fee is my life," Vesper stated. "And the price of the cure is the amulet of the first Luna." Aunt Sarah led Vesper into a small hidden vault beneath the compound floor. It was cold, dry, and sealed with faint ancient Omega wards. "We were never rejected because we were weak, Vesper," Aunt Sarah said, her voice ancient. "We were rejected because we were the keepers of the balance. We had to remain isolated and untouched, lest the king's power claim the amulet prematurely." Aunt Sarah reached into a small, velvet-lined box and pulled out a simple, dark stone pendant. It pulsed with a faint internal crimson glow, the color of the blood moon. "This amulet holds the energy the anchor craves. But transferring it to you is dangerous," Aunt Sarah warned. "You must complete a secondary ritual to bind the amulet's magic directly into your cellular structure. If you fail, the amulet's raw power will be the final thing that shatters your void." The binding. They returned to the citadel. In the ceremonial chamber, Vesper prepared for the binding ritual. Lucien watched from the side, his kingly composure momentarily shattered by concern. "This is madness, Vesper," Lucien said, stepping forward. "We can find another way. There must be another source." Vesper placed the amulet around her neck. It felt impossibly heavy. "There is no other way. This is a problem you created with moon magic, Lucien. It can only be solved with the source of that magic." She met his gaze, the intensity of their functional bond overriding everything else. "If the anchor claims me, it claims you. This is not for my life, King. This is for the stability of the kingdom." Vesper began the quiet, complex incantation given to her by Aunt Sarah. As she chanted, the anchor within her responded, creating an internal pull, a painful, desperate vacuum. The coldness became crippling. The amulet, now glowing a bright, angry crimson, fought back. The two forces, the anchor's parasitic pull and the amulet's raw magical energy, collided inside Vesper. Vesper cried out, a guttural sound that was instantly cut short. She collapsed onto the ceremonial stone. The chamber fell silent. Lucien rushed forward, ignoring the protests of Ilara. He reached Vesper and felt her pulse. It was faint. But then, the color changed. The amulet's harsh crimson glow softened, stabilizing into the steady golden hue of the anchor. The light flowed from the stone into Vesper's neck and settled into her core. Vesper slowly opened her eyes. The coldness was gone. The internal pressure was gone. She felt perfectly balanced, perfectly full. "I am the reservoir, Lucien," Vesper whispered, touching the amulet. "The anchor is stable, and my life is no longer the fee." Lucien looked at the woman he had tried to weaponize, the woman who had defied the physics of his own curse. He didn't offer love. He offered the only thing a king could. "Rise, my queen," Lucien commanded, his voice filled with reverence and absolute stability. "You have secured the peace of this kingdom." The Sovereign's Anchor. Chapter 8. The Shadow of the Past. The Balance and the Warning. With the amulet of the first Luna permanently bound to Vesper, a perfect, stable equilibrium settled over the citadel. Vesper was no longer cold. The amulet provided the constant, low-level moon magic the anchor required, leaving her life force untouched. The king was perfectly stable. Their public appearances were now a show of unified, undeniable power. Lucien, the commanding presence; Vesper, the subtle, shimmering counterforce. The kingdom thrived on this perfect, engineered balance. In the royal study, Vesper felt the amulet thrumming against her collarbone, a comforting, steady presence. "Perfect stability is unsettling, Lucien," Vesper admitted, reviewing a land tax ledger. "It feels like the universe is holding its breath." "The universe respects power, Vesper," Lucien replied, standing by the fire. "We have finally solved the flaw in my bloodline." A sudden sound interrupted them, a flurry of panic from the lower levels. Zev burst into the room, his control barely intact. "Sire, my queen, a breach, not an attack, but a return." "Elaborate." "Commander," Lucien commanded, instantly on alert. "It's the former Alpha, Lord Orion," Zev stammered. "He was found unconscious at the gate. But he's not alone. He was dragged here by a lone, wounded wolf, a warrior who hasn't been seen in 20 years. Vesper's blood ran cold. "Who?" "My queen," Zev whispered, glancing fearfully at Lucien. "It's the king's first beta, Commander Lyra, the one who was exiled." The return of the exiled Commander Lyra was a legend. Lucien's fiercely loyal second-in-command, exiled 20 years ago after a failed assassination attempt on the king's father. She was loyal to the old order and despised all forms of unnatural power. She was brought before Lucien and Vesper, still cloaked in shadow and grime. She was older, scarred, but her eyes burned with the fire of fanaticism. "Lyra," Lucien said, his voice quiet, laced with history and pain. "Why have you returned?" Lyra pushed Orion's unconscious body with her foot. "I returned to warn you, sire. Your anchor may have solved your internal sickness, but it has reawakened the Shadow Pack." "The Shadow Pack is a myth," Zev scoffed. "No," Lyra snapped, her gaze locking onto Vesper's amulet. "They are the ones who hunt those who wield moon magic for mortal gain. They were responsible for the failed attempt on your father's life, and it was their curse that nearly killed you." Lucien frowned. "The anchor was self-imposed." "The instability was self-imposed," Lyra corrected fiercely. "The curse was put on you by the Shadow Pack when you were a boy. It was designed to slowly make your power lethal, forcing your abdication. When you created the anchor, you merely diverted their poison." Final, subtle twist. The anchor solved the self-imposed problem, but the original magical threat is still out there. "Orion was foolish," Lyra continued. "He found the Shadow Pack, hoping they would empower him to overthrow you. Instead, they took his strength and sent him back as a warning. The true test of partnership. The Shadow Pack is hunting the source of the moon magic," Lyra explained, her tone urgent. "For 20 years, they couldn't find you because your illness masked your magical signature. Now, the amulet of the first Luna is a beacon." Vesper felt the amulet thrumming faster, confirming Lyra's words. The Shadow Pack would be drawn to the single largest source of moon magic in the kingdom, her neck. "Their objective will be to seize the amulet and use its concentrated power to destabilize our territories permanently," Vesper said, the problem clear in her mind. "Then we fight," Zev declared, drawing his blade. "No," Vesper countered, shaking her head. "We can't fight an invisible magical force with swords. And if we fight with dominance, the resulting chaos will give the Human Council exactly the reason they need to attack our borders." Lucien turned fully to Vesper, his eyes reflecting a kingly decision. "My queen, the anchor is stable, but my power is still raw force. You now carry the wisdom of the moon and the physics of the bond. How do we defeat a ghost?" This was the moment. The ultimate test of their partnership. Lucien asking Vesper for a judgment that goes beyond her function as a battery. Vesper looked at the amulet, then at Lucien, then at the frantic Lyra. "The anchor and the amulet are perfect stability," Vesper stated. "The Shadow Pack only hunts instability. We cannot fight them. We must remove their motivation." "How?" Lucien pressed. Vesper's eyes glinted with a creative, dangerous solution. "We need to make the single largest source of stable moon magic in the kingdom disappear. The ultimate sacrifice of the artifact." Vesper gathered Lucien, Zev, and Alara in the hidden chamber. "The Shadow Pack is coming for the amulet," Vesper explained. "They want to use its energy to destroy the kingdom's stability. We must destroy the amulet first." Alara gasped. "But the amulet is your life source, Vesper. Without it, the anchor immediately reverts to draining your life force." "And what if I don't give it a choice?" Vesper challenged. "Lucien, you need to uncork the dominance anchor completely. Transfer your raw, contained power to me. All of it, faster than you did for the duel." Lucien looked horrified. "Vesper, that much power in an unstable transfer state will incinerate the amulet and likely you. It will saturate my void past the point of holding the amulet's magic," Vesper corrected, her voice resolute. "The anchor will recognize the amulet's magic as contamination and instinctively reject it. We force the magic out of the amulet and into the atmosphere. The amulet becomes inert, the beacon vanishes, and the Shadow Pack's target is gone." "And your life?" Zev asked, his voice thick. Vesper gave Lucien a fierce look that contained all the fear and resolve of their partnership. "My life is now fully intertwined with yours. We solve the problem, then we solve the cost. Now, King, transfer the power." Lucien didn't hesitate this time. He moved to the platform and lowered his mental shields, uncorking the full, terrifying dominance. Vesper stood, gripping the now blazing amulet. The raw alpha dominance flooded her system, a tidal wave of pure power meeting the amulet's intense, contained magic. The two forces clashed inside her. Vesper screamed, and the amulet exploded not outward, but inward, releasing its magic in a silent, brilliant crimson flash that spread throughout the room before vanishing. Vesper collapsed, clutching her neck. The amulet was gone, reduced to ash. Lucien rushed to her, terrified. "The beacon is gone," Vesper managed, her voice weak. "The anchor is draining me. I am cold." She shivered violently, her pale skin already looking fragile. Lucien didn't hesitate. He picked her up. "Then we return to our necessary function, my queen." He carried her to the royal chambers. The Shadow Pack's threat was gone, but the high, constant, intimate fee for the kingdom's stability was back.